Hey everyone, I'm Liz, and today I'll be taking you through my favorite jelly printing techniques using my favorite materials for jelly printing. I apologize that my hand gestures don't quite match my voice, but I did have a little issue with the audio. Right now I'm just taking you through the materials I typically use when I'm going to start jelly printing. I have a brayer, my trusty old speedball brayer that you see me demonstrating here, that I use to spread the ink on my Gelli Arts jelly plates. I like to spread the paint that I no longer need on a wet paper towel or a wet terry cloth towel, as you see here. And of course, I'll be using my favorite paints of all time, which are the golden open acrylics. Typically, I like to use Bristol paper. Here I'm just using some regular paper that I got out of a sketchbook that I no longer was using. And then for texture purposes, I'm actually going to be using a variety of different materials today. I'm going to be using some feathers that I got from the craft store, some popsicle sticks, some string, and several other materials that I think are going to create some really interesting textures as I go and create multi-layered prints today. Typically when I get started jelly printing, I like to put down a piece of paper roughly about the same size as the paper that I'm going to be printing on, and then I layer my jelly plate on top. I have several different sizes, but this size that I'm using today is the 8x10 size, so roughly about the same size as a sheet of copy paper. I start out by selecting a color, and I drag a small squirt of that color across my jelly plate and distribute it evenly with my brayer. What I love about golden open acrylics is that they dry very slowly, which helps in the jelly printing process considerably. And you can't beat golden's pigmentation and overall quality. They're the best quality acrylics that I have found so far. And I've been painting since about 2007. Check out that beautiful pigmentation on the very first print that I pulled. For my very first print, I just wanted to basically create the first layer, which is just one solid color. Since I still had color on my jelly print plate, I am just taking another sheet of paper and smoothing over the paper with my hand, giving it a nice firm massage so I can pull more of that color off the plate and have another solid color background. Then I go in with some kind of complementary or opposing color. So I was previously using a magenta pink, and now I'm going to be using this beautiful ultramarine blue. Not quite the complement, but still on the opposite side of the color spectrum, so I can create some really beautiful visual contrast. And you can see here I'm just overlaying some yarn on top of the jelly plate and then pressing firmly with my hand so that I can record all the beautiful textures of the yarn onto the plate. I like to use the lid of a ball mason jar to help me get in between the grooves that I wouldn't necessarily be able to get if I was just smoothing over it with my hand. And that's my first print. That's 2 layers, several more layers coming. I always like to take advantage of all the paint that I have left on my plate by pulling several ghost prints. A ghost print is basically the second or third print that you can pull when you still have leftover paint on your plate. I'm about to pull my third ghost print here, using that beautiful texture created by the yarn on the jelly plate. Watch what happens. I love this particular ghost print. That texture is amazing. I find that often ghost prints are actually even more interesting than the real print I had intended to make when I started jelly printing. So don't ever waste the paint on your jelly plate. Try to pull as many prints as you can so that not only can you ensure that you're not wasting paint, you're actually going to be experiencing what Bob Ross likes to call happy mistakes or something along those lines. Happy little accidents. There you go. That's what I was looking for. Because the ghost prints are typically so beautiful. Now here, after making this beautiful sky blue background, I'm just going to go and use some of those feathers that I got from the craft store, and I'm just spreading them out so I could try to get like the bristles, for lack of a better word, or hairs in between each feather and create some beautiful textures. Once again, I'm using the lid from my ball mason jar to help me smooth down and try to get all those different grooves in between the actual objects that I'm trying to print. And look at that, you guys. Look at those gorgeous layers. This process gets easily very repetitive. I'm just now taking that ghost print and taking advantage of the paint left on my plate and doing the same process whereby I use that ball mason jar lid and try to press that texture onto my print. Now you'll notice I gave that print a thumbs down. I wasn't too happy with it, but that's okay. I never throw away any prints unless for some reason the paper breaks, because I can always rescue a bad print by basically doing more layers of paint on top. So I encourage you guys to hang on to all your bad prints because you can definitely rescue them and create really beautiful final pieces with them. If all else fails, you can always use them for collages as well. Moving forward, I'm going to try making some different kinds of textures here on this gorgeous yellow background by taking that popsicle stick and dragging across my jelly plate until I can remove parts of the paint, because I want to create a free-form shape with the yellow paint. You can also do this kind of technique using, for example, a discarded gift card or credit card. I just happen to have a lot of popsicle sticks, so that's what I was using to scrape off some of that paint off the jelly plate. Plus, I like that the popsicle sticks are pretty soft, so they're not going to damage the overall texture of your jelly plate. Please be careful as you guys are cleaning your jelly plates. You don't want to use your nails to scratch into the surface because that will compromise the overall texture of the jelly plate, the inherent texture of it. Here I'm taking several different prints I had already created and doing several more layers with the leftover paint on my plate. I love that moment when you slowly lift the paper off of the plate and you go to see what exactly that print looks like. I love the moment of surprise, and I love the fact that no one print looks exactly the same as the one before it. All of them are slightly different in their own way. Here I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm not using any more items to create texture right now. Instead, I'm going to be using a mask. And a mask is referring to any object that you put down on your printing plate that is basically going to block some part of the paint on the plate so that you can create some really beautiful layering effects on your jelly prints. For my mask, I'm actually going to be using these alphabet letters I had left over from a bulletin board in my classroom. I'm not putting them down in any particular order because I don't really care about those letters being read to form a word. Instead, I'm just kind of overlapping the shapes for visual interest and using one of those solid color backgrounds to print on top of. So once again, smoothing over the back of the paper with my hand and using that lid to just kind of help me press down a little further and try to get some of the spaces in between each letter form so that when I pull the print, it looks so beautiful and amazingly layered. If you wanted to create a print using letters that you actually intended for someone to read, like for example, if you were using those letters to spell out your name, you would have to make sure you mirror the letters. So for example, if I wanted to spell out my name, Liz, I would need to write Zill on the plate so that when I pull the print, it would be the exact mirror image. However, I really don't care about doing that right now. I'm just using the letters again as basically just decoration. I mean, they don't have any specific purpose. I just like the way that they look. So when I put down the letters, I'm not really worried about creating mirror images. In fact, if they're a little bit upside down or backwards, that's all the better for me. What I love about jelly printing is I don't need to have a specific idea in my head as to what the print is going to look like. I can just start laying down different objects such as the feathers, the popsicle sticks to create different marks, the yarn, leaves from the garden. The choices are endless. And I can just start making several different layers of different textures and different colors, and it never ceases to astound me in a good way how amazingly multi-layered my prints are and how inspiring they are to me to do so many other things, such as using the prints in visual journals and several handmade books that I create. Now, there's not any one recipe for a good print. It just requires a lot of experimentation. But one thing I can advise you is to use good quality paints if you can afford them. I have tried jelly printing with many different kinds of paints. I have tried using cheap student grade paints, and I have tried using expensive artist grade paints like the ones that you see me use here. And unfortunately, the price that you paid is a little bit on the expensive side, but it is worth it. I do not recommend using student grade paints on a jelly plate because I have experienced problems with the paint sticking to the plate and ripping off pieces of the paper and overall just being extremely messy. Using my golden open acrylics, it makes for a much easier process because the colors are always going to be extremely pigmented, that's a given. But because the paints dry so slowly, I'm never going to run into any issues where the paint is going to dry too fast on my plate and I'll have to basically scrape it off. And so far, I have never run into the issue where the paper peels right off. In this case, you can see that I'm using some parchment paper and I'm basically just printing with that parchment paper so that I can create a jagged kind of edge make it look kind of like, let's say, a mountain range or waves if I were to go and layer all those papers together. But here I was just trying to create another freeform shape. Notice how I'm using the parchment paper and now the alphabet letters as two different kinds of masks on my printing plate. And that, my friends, is what I call magic. How beautiful is that print? Here I'm just creating some textures using a little card that's made by Gelli Arts. It's basically got a bunch of jagged edges already cut into the card. But if you didn't want to purchase this, you could actually just go and take an old credit card or gift card and basically cut a lot of jagged edges into one side, so you could drag those kind of like interesting lines across the surface of the plate. You could also use an old comb, for example, and do that as well. Just be careful not to press down the comb onto the jelly plate so you don't make any holes to it. Then when I go and lift that print, you'll see that I have a series of these really interesting lines that I was creating by basically just dragging that one card across the surface of the paint. So you can play around with it and see if that's something that's to your liking. Well, this was definitely a very fun afternoon that I spent jelly printing with you. Thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you guys have gotten some really good ideas and some tips and techniques that you guys can try out when you jelly print yourselves. Be sure to check back for more videos on my channel where I will experiment using different kinds of paints on my jelly printing plate and using different kinds of textures as I endeavor to create even more multi-layered, beautiful, colorful prints. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.